I'm very pleased to be here with you this morning for the opening ceremony of this extraordinary session of the Council of Ministers of the African Petroleum Producers Organization. I must say that I am becoming an honorary member of this elite club, as this is my second attendance at your meetings, and some even say a third. It's in fact the third attendance at these meetings. Aside from the pleasure of meeting you all again, I think that my third coming entitles me to ask you with a Nigerian slang, how far? It is heartwarming to note that since the last meeting, a lot of progress has been made. I recall that at that last meeting, ministers resolved to work to revitalize the organization and to reposition it to meet present and emerging challenges of the global oil and gas industry, and to compete effectively with other international and regional energy organizations like OPEC, GCF, etc. This resolution followed the unanimous agreement that 30 years after its founding, the APPO had not sufficiently lived up to the expectation of its founding fathers. As the birthplace of what we now know today as APPO, Nigeria has been especially concerned about this. Africa needs a united front in the global energy discourse, and we're convinced that there is no better institution to convene those conversations than APPO itself. Your Excellencies, it's immensely gratifying that the decision to reassess the effectiveness of the organization and to embark on significant reforms came from within the organization itself. I want to commend the Council of Ministers of APPO for the bold decision to confront the fundamental challenges facing the organization. Since the July 2017 meeting in Abuja, I'm told that 2 other ministerial meetings have been held in Luanda, Angola, and in Jamina, Chad, to advance the journey of reform. Let me, on behalf of President Muhammadu Buhari and the government and people of Nigeria, thank you, the Council of Ministers, for the confidence reposed in Nigeria, manifesting in your unanimous agreement to place the responsibility for leading the reform process on Nigeria's Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Dr. Emmanuel Ibe Kachiku. Permit me the immodesty of saying that Minister Kachiku, President of APPO, was, of course, as you know, until March 2016, very much, and has remained since March 2016, I beg your pardon, very much at the center of the reform effort in the Nigerian oil and gas industry. And of course, is very well placed to creditably deliver this particular reform effort, given that it is very similar to what he has championed here on the domestic oil and gas front as minister in the last 2.5 years. Under his watch, the Ministry of Petroleum Resources has developed and carefully implemented a comprehensive blueprint for reform known as the 7 Big Wins, focusing on 7 key reform areas. The results produced so far have all been central to what is described as a change agenda of our administration in the oil and gas sector. The long overdue legislation that will provide a modern, transparent, and efficient framework for governance of the oil and gas industry, the Petroleum Industry and Governance Bill, was first introduced more than a decade ago, is now in the final stages of becoming law. There are other legislation touching on regulation, fiscal issues, and community issues, which are also in the process of being developed. Furthermore, for the first time in decades, modern policies for the governance of Nigeria's oil and gas sectors have been discussed and approved by the Federal Executive Council. These include the National Petroleum Policy, the National Gas Policy, both of which set clear directions on the role of government in the industry and outline a roadmap for the governance of the sector, for its operations, and highlight the investment opportunities available for investors both within and outside Nigeria. Your Excellencies, given the progress achieved so far in the Nigeria oil and gas sector, I can therefore confidently assure you that Nigeria and Dr. Ebeka Chiku and his team will exceed our expectations regarding the APPO reform program. I want to assure you also that Nigeria will give you all the support you need to realize your vision of making APPO, quote, the world's major institution of reference on Africa's hydrocarbon matters, end of quote, and indeed the pride of Africa. Today's meeting is yet another crucial chapter in the revitalization and reform of the APPO. As you proceed in your discussions and deliberations, I want you to consider all of the pertinent issues with an open mind and to put the collective interest, of course, ahead of all other interests. I'm confident that a revitalized APPO will contribute tremendously to the development of the African oil and gas industry, particularly now that Africa is becoming a major global player in the sector. The oil and gas industry, as you know, is a very capital-intensive one. As individual countries, we often do not have the resources required to make the necessary investments to grow the industry. This is especially so because these investments are competing with infrastructure and social services for the limited resources available to us as governments. By serving as a platform for increased collaboration and cooperation amongst member countries, the APPO will go a long way towards helping overcome these financial challenges. Increased synergy will no doubt help mobilize the investments needed to facilitate and to deliver the major infrastructures required by the industry, such as trans-border gas and oil pipelines, joint refineries, gas plants, and so on. Nigeria, as you must of course know, is already leading in some senses by example with our West Africa gas pipeline project and the Nigeria-Niger collaboration on refining. In the increasingly interdependent world in which we live, greater levels of regional economic integration will be required, allowing the free flow of the dividends of research and technology. APPO also needs to seriously look beyond public sector or government ownership of its activities and tap into private sector competencies and models to a greater degree. I'd also like to speak briefly about the APPO Fund for Technical Cooperation, which I'm told is also undergoing recapitalization, to enable it better fulfill the role for which it was established. The financial model of the fund, for example, may need some retweaking. It could be remodeled after similar institutions that have succeeded, like the OPEC fund, or, where, of course, as you know, non-OPEC members can begin to invest. It is time also for us to open up the APPO fund such that non-APPO member countries and private institutions should be able to invest. In addition, the APPO fund ought to operate as an autonomous entity, independent perhaps of the APPO Secretariat, in the same way that the OPEC fund operates independently of OPEC itself. If institutions similar to APPO and the APPO fund have succeeded and are continuing to succeed in other parts of the world, then we have no reason and no excuse to fail as a continent. Your Excellencies, it is important to acknowledge that the relationship of our various countries with oil and gas is in an interesting and somewhat complicated mode. It is for many of us the mainstay of our economies, delivering much needed government revenues and foreign exchange to our economies. But at the same time, there is a challenge of overdependence, evident from the troubles that we all went through when the price of crude oil dramatically fell in the period 2014 to 2015. The lesson here is that while oil and gas will continue to be critical to our revenue bases and our national economies, we must redouble our efforts to achieve the following. One, to diversify our economies away from the dangerous overdependence. And two, to ensure that we invest as much as is possible of today's current oil and gas revenues in the infrastructure and human capital that will underpin future economic growth and development. We must keep in mind that oil and gas are only guaranteed as today's resources and not necessarily tomorrow's. We cannot bet on the fact that even a few decades ago from now, these natural resources will not be as central or as relevant to the global economy as they are today. All serious economies around the world have realized this and are making determined plans for a world beyond oil, or as they say, a zero-oil world. As African countries, we cannot afford to act differently. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have no doubt that this extraordinary session of the Council of Ministers of African Petroleum Producers will facilitate increased cooperation amongst our member countries for the development and implementation of robust policies and solutions focused on maximizing the value in and the benefits of our oil and gas resources. So while wishing you productive deliberations, it is now my honor and pleasure to declare open this extraordinary session of the Council of Ministers of the African Petroleum Producers Organization. I thank you very much for listening.